Thank you everybody for joining us today for our presentation on managing the data privacy landscape. Sue and I will be going through the presentation deck, and at the end of the presentation deck is our contact information. So if you have any questions or concerns or need further clarification, details, we're happy to provide that. So you can reach out to us via the email. Also, you're free to connect with us on LinkedIn, whatever works best for you. So just kind of going through our background before we get started. My work, I am the managing director for Focal Point Data Risks LA office, and my work entails a lot of work with IT audit as well as information security, doing all sorts of compliance and risk assurance work, including data privacy. I have done personally myself a lot of GLBA assessments, data privacy work for internal audit, reviewing information security programs, and now getting more into the CCPA. So these are some of the things that I have done, and then Sue can talk a little bit more about her data privacy experience.
Hi, my name is Sue Yim. I'm a senior manager at Focal Point working in the data privacy practice. My previous work experience were both as in-house internal audit for companies in manufacturing technology and internal audit advisory and consulting in various industries. I've been with Focal Point for 3 years working with various industries such as technology, retail, food industry, healthcare, financial service, and consumer products. And my team and I have provided clients with privacy gap assessments, audits, and remediation efforts, helping them get compliant with European, California, Brazil, and Canada regulations, just to name a few. In addition, we perform HIPAA assessments and third-party risk assessments. In the next slide, Roger will summarize on why internal audit is important in a privacy program.
Great, thanks, Sue. So one of the motivations in developing this presentation was because as we're getting more involved in doing data privacy audits and assessments, I came to the realization that internal auditors aren't very keenly aware of the privacy landscape, the legal requirements, the frameworks, and therefore they aren't able to effectively build out their internal audit programs. So having said that, what we want to try to accomplish in this talk is give you some frameworks to go about developing your internal audit data privacy program. Also, maybe we can provide you with, for example, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework that is kind of accepted by the industry and also recommended by ISACA. In one of the latest journals of ISACA, they actually map a lot of the IAPP risk assessment, risk management to the NIST cybersecurity framework. So I think that's a good place to start. We can also look at NIST, and we can talk about GLBA as well if you're more focused on the banking side. So I wanted to give you some tools you can take away with you and kind of give you a framework to start out with. So the agenda for today, we're going to start out by, we're going to break up this talk into two different segments. The first segment is going to talk about the framework for legal compliance, regulatory compliance. So we'll talk about, specifically Sue will talk about the legal requirements around GDPR, CCPA, and how that plays into developing the internal audit program. We'll give you kind of the lay of the land, some of the specifics around the policy and the regulatory requirements, and then how they're being implemented. So that gives you some inspiration to build out the internal audit program. In the second segment, we'll focus more on the tools and frameworks to build out the program, and what are their key areas for consideration, what are some of the pitfalls, and basically how you can create a successful program. Again, this is a lot of information, so you're welcome to reach out to us. We'll be able to help you wherever you need help. Sue, do you want to take it away?
Thank you, Raj. So as you can see, there are a lot of news related to privacy, and they come from reputable media outlets like New York Times, Bloomberg, and Financial Times. This is all due to changes in technology and numerous breaches making headlines. Consumers are becoming more aware because they see headlines related to breaches or had their own personal data compromised. And in addition, new privacy regulations being passed more frequently. To put it in perspective, in 1995, just 1% of the world had internet access. Today, the number has skyrocketed to 4 billion internet users worldwide. So privacy is no longer just a concern for certain industries like payment card, healthcare, and financial service industries. So you might ask yourself, how has privacy impacted by recent developments? In the next slide, we'll discuss further on recent events. So due to COVID-19, the world grinded to a halt, and this did impact some to privacy. And as you'll note, some regulations are actually being postponed, and more emphasis is placed on public health surveillance. As most employees start working remotely, the use of technology has actually skyrocketed. Like we saw in recent headlines, there are still concerns with privacy and security with virtual platforms. In March 2020 alone, there were 67 incidents worldwide. In addition, there are more headlines that will require changes to companies' operations, such as GREM 2 that occurred in July 2020, which is the invalidation of Privacy Shield. And in addition, also there was more modifications to CPAs, such as CPRA, AB 1281, and more changes was actually announced recently, even on October 12th. So the increase in use in technology, and as technology continues to evolve, it will be very important that companies make classifying their data a priority. We'll go over what the privacy landscape looks like and why it is important that companies make privacy a carrier focus. So as you can see that the U.S. alone, new regulations are cropping up and being passed more frequently. And we have noted that many states are also observing CCPA to either enforce new or updated existing privacy regulations. In addition, there are still talks about federal regulations to ensure consistency. This is also very similar to other countries. Some countries such as Brazil and Thailand had or will enforce regulations similar to GDPR. And it's becoming more important that companies be proactive rather than reactive as new regulations get enforced. As reacting will make you have to change your operation each time. So like I mentioned, GDPR and CCPA have influenced many countries and states. So I will talk about quick facts about both GDPR and CCPA. Here is an overview of the two privacy regulations that brought more awareness to the world. These similarities are related to individual rights requests, but also different such as how they define personal data and opt-in, opt-out requirements. Also, CCPA requires that companies must action on rights for activities from January 1st, 2019, if a request came in on January 1st, 2020. And so regulators will actually be able to see whether you have been actually in compliance since 2019, since you have to action on requests from January 1st, 2020. So why are these two regulations important to the U.S.-based company that does not do business in California especially? GDPR still holds U.S. companies liable if they process EU personal data. CCPA is, although it's primarily focused on California residents, like I mentioned before, more regulations are going to be enforced. U.S. and international consumers are holding companies more accountable. And plus, it'll be more expensive to update your company operations, reacting to every new privacy regulation that is enforced. And finally, there are serious penalties associated with both regulations. So as you can see, the GDPR fines can be actually as high as 2 to 4% of global revenue. The CCPA penalties includes per violation by Attorney General, AG, and also includes individual class action litigation per incident. So with California's large population and the fact that fines are per individual and per incident and violation, this can actually add up. And we're actually seeing more companies having sometimes hundreds of internal and external systems due to changes in technology. We also see companies are engaging more third parties, whether it's in regards to sharing or selling, or even service providers. So in a situation, hypothetically, if you have 1,000 California resident personal data and you share that with one third party and you didn't show that you did your due diligence with that one third party, that could be up to $7.5 million just for the AG fine. And if that includes fines related to each individual, that's $750 per incident. So this could be a significant fine, and we've already seen some losses in regards to GDPR and CCPA. So the next slide, Raj will talk to you about the data privacy program.
Great, thanks, Sue. I think this gives us a good framework to start out with, and to kind of build up the program. This particular slide talks about the different stakeholders involved. In any kind of audit that we perform, we do an adequate risk assessment. And in my experience, when we have looked at data privacy, we've often defaulted to going to information security, which is where a lot of the data privacy programs are housed. And that's a good place to start. But what you can see here is that data privacy is much larger than that. So we look at cybersecurity, we look at privacy and compliance, but really, in order to do an accurate risk assessment, we need to look at other areas in the organization, including marketing, HR, even third-party relationships. So, for example, if I am creating a marketing program, I'm collecting data specifically that will inhibit my ability to be in compliance with CCPA, you can see how that becomes in scope. Similarly, if I am HR organization collecting private information of employees, again, that will become in scope for compliance with CCPA and potentially with other regulations like GLBA or GDPR. And similarly, for example, if you look at third-party compliance, right now, a lot of auditors are aware of the fact that third parties have to be in compliant and they have to look at their SOC reports potentially or other ways of mitigating the risk. But the business doesn't really know that. So they will, contract with a third party provider, cloud provider, and they won't even think twice about the data privacy impact. So you have to be fairly comfortable with the data privacy across the organization, and you can't just rely upon the cybersecurity or the privacy team to basically do all that work for you. So I think that would be the key takeaway from that slide. In terms of performing the assessments, I think there's a lot to be said to with the three lines of defense. I think a lot of you are familiar with that in terms of the role IT and compliance and audit plays. And this particular slide, just want to highlight the fact that compliance probably and IT is going to come up with a lot of the frameworks as it relates to which program is going to be built, but audit really provides an independent assessment. So there's an opportunity here for auditors to work together with compliance. We can provide an independent assurance, obviously, but we can also actually help compliance and IT in several ways. We'll go into that a little bit later. Also, the difference in terms of the compliance frameworks, I would kind of look at the NIST Privacy Framework, and we can send you this as well. To send us an email or drop us a note, we can send this to you. And this is a good place to start. If management decides to use a different framework, then I think you do have to work with them. But this would be a good place to start, in our opinion. So, kind of just looking at the compliance assessments and who are the different stakeholders involved. So, I talked about doing the risk assessment, and one of the things to take away is the fact that a lot of companies don't have very robust data classification. So data classification programs basically look at the data as it exists across the enterprise and how is that data managed. If you don't know where that data is, you can't really manage the risk around that data, obviously. And a lot of the times you see the data being replicated across the organization. So you will have one record that is housed in different applications, and they may not be synced up. So the question becomes, where is the key data? Where is the master data? Who maintains that master data? And only then you can start talking about protecting that data, and potentially if you have a DSR request or some other means of deleting customer requests, then you need to be able to identify where that master record is. Another key for risk management is data minimization. So again, you need to have very robust data classification in order to do data minimization. In terms of different stakeholders, we talked about independent assessment from internal auditors. You also have external entities, and the Attorney General actually gets involved as far as CCPA is concerned. So you're going to see a lot more teeth, you can say, to the data privacy legislation because of the fact that the Attorney General is involved. You have class action lawsuits, and actually there's a extension to CCPA that's currently on the November ballot. So you might see more enforcement going forward as well. So importance of data privacy audit, I think, a lot of the times people focus on the increased fines associated with non-compliance, which makes sense, and Sue talked about that as well. But in addition to that, I think data privacy, is a business issue because a lot of the times organizations will lose customers if they don't have it in place and it's not effective. There have been some recent cases. Garmin, for example, their business went down, data privacy and cybersecurity issue. Apple continues to push data privacy in their marketing efforts to gain confidence of consumers. They're pushing data privacy to either gain or retain consumers. So this is an area that internal audit really becomes part of, not only from a regulatory compliance issue, but it becomes an issue for business strategy. And this is an opportunity again for audit to add a lot of value to the enterprise. The enterprise might be looking to internal auditors to help mitigate data privacy issues before they rise to the level of any fines. And at the same time, they might be looking to internal auditors to fill those mitigate gaps so that they can retain customers, so that they can actually use data privacy as a source of competitive advantage. So really an opportunity for data privacy and internal audit to add value to the organization beyond just regulatory compliance. Sue is going to go through kind of case study to drive home some of these points.
Thank you, Raj. Like we mentioned previously, that the privacy landscape is actually very new for most companies. Most companies still only have either one person or very few people actually driving the privacy program. So when we found when privacy teams have limited resources, they base most of their privacy program on documentation or information they already know. However, I want to emphasize it is important to have face-to-face conversations with all key departments. And as you saw in the previous slide, it's a lot of departments. At one of my clients, they only had 2 people managing the privacy department, and they based their records of processing on the things that they already know. And so they hired us, and through face-to-face discussion, we identified that one of their departments were collecting surveys on consumers. They were collecting information such as name, email, gender, date of birth with month, date, and year, zip code, and other shopping preferences drive future sales. So it turned out that the results of the surveys actually kept in Excel. They did not delete the data, did not password protect the file, and also it shared it with third parties without encrypting it. So through our efforts of identifying the type of data that was collected, the company actually stopped that practice and limited the type of questions they asked in surveys. As internal audits, we have been exposed to like a wide variety of departments, and so we also have the skill of asking very probing, critical questions, which will drive a more accurate picture of the privacy environment. Again, from an internal audit perspective, we know that documentation does not always equal what is actually happening. We hope this information was very helpful. Here's our contact information. So if you have any questions about the privacy framework or anything in regards to how to implement a privacy program, you can contact us here. Thank you.